So we're really excited today about our presenters, and actually I think I'm going to do both our main presenters' bios right here at the top. First, we're going to hear from Mark Pruitt. Mark is the principal of the Power Bureau, which is a consulting firm focused on reducing energy costs and price risks for small and mid-sized customers. He also teaches at Northwestern, and Mark served as the first director of the Illinois Power Agency, which is the state agency responsible for stabilizing energy costs and managing the RPS here in the state. Fun fact about Mark. Mark grew up in Schaumburg, Illinois, and if you're here from Illinois, you'll know. And he believed for a long time that Schaumburg's name was a German translation for near the mall. But that's what we always say. Where are you? Well, in Schaumburg, near the mall. So, okay, so that's Mark. We're also going to hear from Michael Strong, who is a regulatory consultant working with the Joint Solar Parties. He is a partner and chair of the Energy Law Group, where he helps trade associations shape the rules of the game before the Illinois regulators, and helps companies as well across the energy industry in all aspects of their strategy, transactions, and operations, everything that touches the energy space. And he primarily works with developers and long-term asset owners in the solar industry, as well as related energy providers. We are so excited to have both Mark and Michael here with us today. And so I'll hand the reins over, the mic over to Mark.
Great. If somebody can give me a thumbs up or let me know that the slides are up and moving, or give me an audible on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, we can see you, we can hear you. We're good.
Great. Perfect. Thanks so much for inviting me. Apologies to those who have had to sit through this type of thing for briefings over the past few weeks. I'm going to be brief. So this is going to be a high-speed, low-drag run through. Some of you have seen a lot of this before. If you have questions, please dump them into the chat. We'll try to get to them. And I believe the associations have this presentation. So, by all means, please distribute it as needed. Do a little bit of introduction, talk about the drivers for the Illinois energy market. We'll talk then about the study and just some concluding notes. This study was sponsored by the associations, American Clean Power Association, Clean Grid Alliance, Solar Energy Industries Association, and Coalition for Community Solar Access. The representative members down there are not the total list of members, but those are the members that contacted me to provide input to the study. So I had the benefit of the wisdom of a lot of experience in putting together this study and conducting the analysis, and I very much appreciate it. So why are we talking about storage? And this is our starting point when we're talking to the legislators, because there's some problems. Few things that we track at Power Bureau is just the condition of the overall market. So here's a few touch points, and maybe these are fun facts for the next cocktail party you're at. You'll be the most interesting person in the room if you can, unload some of these. First off, for the first time in my memory, Illinois and PJM and MISO generally are experiencing projections of load growth for years. The forward load projections have been flat to even declining. But as you see on the screen here on the left is MISO's projected load growth under their futures 1, 2, and 3 scenarios going through 2040. And then on the right, PJM's load growth, where last year's load profile or load projection is the blue line, and they've had to replace it with the green line. All of the trends are decidedly up. That's a change. And while load growth is great, it does present more strain on the grid. You need to have those resources available to meet that growing demand. So how are you going to meet that demand? Well, it's not going to be from your existing power plants. Both MISO and PJM are projecting significant amounts of traditional retirements or retirements of traditional supply and capacity. MISO on the left again is anticipating maybe as much as 60,000 megawatts of retirements of by 2030, the vast majority of those being coal and natural gas. PJM expecting 24 gigawatts of retirements by 2030. PJM's graph gives us some color coding to indicate what are the drivers of those retirements. Primarily policy. As you see in 2030, the bar for Illinois relates to the anticipated retirements resulting from CEJA. So growing demand, reductions in incumbent supply. So, well, maybe we could get new supply online. A lot of renewables. Folks have been working on this for years. And the challenge is that you can't bring on new capacity very easily. This is a map representation from a study conducted by Lawrence Berkeley Lab, identifying basically the batting average of what utility scale or transmission interconnected renewables and natural gas, all generating capacity. What's the success rate of projects proposed for interconnection? If you look at PJM and MISO, there is in the bracketed, the brackets, so PJM has 15% in the brackets, MISO has 15% in the brackets as well. That is the amount of proposed capacity, megawatts, that have been that were applied for to those organizations that actually were deployed over the 10-year period of the study. So what they're really saying is that only 15% of the capacity that's proposed for PJM and MISO actually gets built or was built over the period of time of the study, which was a 10-year period. So this gets to the question that we heard from some policymakers, which is, well, yeah, Mark, we get it. Demand's growing, existing resources are retiring, but don't we have a huge amount of projects in the queue? Well, yeah, there are a huge amount of projects in the queue, and the vast majority of them will never be built based on this track record. So we know PJM and MISO are making some changes to try to accommodate this, but this is just the environment. I'm not saying things can't change. I'm just saying that the past might be a guide to the past performance as being an indicator of future gains. I think there's probably some truth in that here. So you've got that rough calculus of growing demand, reduced supply, very slow replacement of that supply, and now we're starting to see some flashing lights. These are the most recent reports from NERC, identifying those regions of the country that have elevated or high risk for summer on the left and winter on the right. And elevated risk means that if there is an extended hot period during the summer or cold period during the winter, coupled with a few key outages, then those regions could have a difficult time maintaining reliability. You see the Ameren portion of Illinois is noted in the MISO map as having a problem during the summer, and all of Illinois being covered in the elevated risk category by NERC in the winter category. So polar vortex, heat waves could upend things and cause some reliability issues for some or all of the state. Coming in a little bit closer from NERC, which takes a very high level, let's just take a look at what PJM and MISO are saying. These are graphs that identify the projections from MISO. So this isn't Mark Pruitt math, this is MISO math. And on the left is their projection of demand versus available capacity in 2027 and 2032 on the right for each of the load zones. Now, these are projections. It's not fact, but it's informed opinion from the grid operator. I highlighted or circled in red the load zone 4, which is central southern Illinois. And what you're just seeing here is that for futures 1 and 2 in the MISO planning kit, we see that there's probably about 12, 13 gigawatts of demand, but only about 5.5 to 6 gigawatts of capacity.
Mark,
Now there is some import.
Could we briefly have you go back to slide 8 and clarify some of those numbers? If you see in the chat,
Slide
Margaret
8?
from Envy is, yes. Margaret,
Okay, in the interest of time, maybe we...
Yeah, we can keep the questions till later, but this was about slide 8. I don't know if you could very quickly address that. My apologies.
What about slide 8, please?
She's asking 21% versus 15% in MISO. What do those mean, the bracketed numbers?
Sure. So again, the bracketed numbers represent the percentage of megawatts capacity that were proposed for interconnection that were actually connected or eventually connected. The 21% in MISO represents the number of projects. So number of projects and megawatts.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Megawatts being bracketed. So what you're basically seeing here is Ameren indicating that there's not enough capacity to meet demand in 2027, 2032 in central southern Illinois. As you'll notice, that's not something unique just to central southern Illinois. It's something that's happening in other regions as well. But it is a rather extreme case in Illinois. PJM is indicating similar strains in their projections as well, though not quite up to shortage range just yet. In the bar graph, you see in the pink lines, their 2023 forecast for demand, peak demand, running from 2023 to 2030. The dashed line is a little bit higher, and that represents the projection if there's a significant amount of electrification, and which could be transportation, conversion from natural gas to electricity. I believe that it also anticipates a higher adoption or deployment of data centers as well. What they're showing here in the bars are the sources of capacity to meet that demand. And you see in the dark blue that the thermal resources are retiring quickly. They're being backfilled by renewables and demand response in green and gray. And then in the lighter gray, the diagonally striped portion at the top, that's high new entry capacity. That would be a volume of capacity that anticipates almost all of the proposed capacity being deployed. As we know, that would be contrary to the historical experience in PJM. So some have observed that the high new entry capacity that's being shown on this graph is a bit of wishful thinking. If that is the case, then by 2030 in PJM, you could see a situation where demand does exceed capacity. You know, that's what they're showing. You see the numbers playing out of the bottom. I would just draw your attention to under reserve margin, low new entry, the top part of that table, under the electrification circumstance or projection, you see that they start with a reserve margin that's excess capacity by about 22%, and that shrinks to 3% by 2030. Being in the single digits puts you in the same classification as ERCOT before their most recent blackouts. So I'm not saying that it's deterministic, I'm just saying that it's probabilistic, that you start to have reliability problems when the system comes under strain from extreme weather or outages or some combination of the two. So those are projections. That's the future. Let's talk about now. You know, will those models come true? Well, I think we're starting to get some signals that the projections are correct, and we're seeing that in most recently in the auction results from the PJM capacity auction this summer. You see in the graph the history of capacity prices in PJM from 2017 through 2025. The 2025 refers to the June 2025 to May 2026 period. And you see that, at least for Northern Illinois, which is part of PJM RTO, the light blue line, this year, in this compliance year, we have a price at $29 a megawatt day. That price starting on June 1 will go to $270 a megawatt day. But the good news is we're not Maryland for a variety of reasons, one of which is that Maryland, between Baltimore Gas and Electric, is going to see capacity prices at $466 a megawatt day. So no matter how challenging things can be, I guess they could always be worse. Moving into the future, even though PJM has delayed its next auction, which was to be held in December, they're pushing that off another 6 months. But people have already started to make their own projections for the 2026-2027 period. Here's one from Morgan Stanley that anticipates that capacity will likely go to the bidding cap of $695 a megawatt day. Don't know if that's going to be a fact, but that's a projection. And definitely there is a lot of pressure and evidence to suggest that higher prices are probably the result of market dynamics. What does that mean for customers? You can check the arithmetic later. I just highlighted in the red box what was really meaningful. We modeled out a 5 megawatt industrial customer, so just plastics plant, maybe very large printing operation, maybe a community college or entities such as that. Essentially, this increase in capacity costs will cause a year-over-year increase between 2024 and 2025 of $400,000 just in capacity costs. It doesn't count delivery charges, energy, transmission, any of that stuff, just capacity. If prices go to where Morgan Stanley says they're going to go, it'll be $1.1 million increase. So the lesson here is tight capacity markets mean high capacity prices. High capacity prices are very expensive for consumers, and no one gets out. The capacity prices are applied to everybody, and this is a very real threat to Illinois, not only from a reliability standpoint, but also from a cost standpoint. So that's the background. We took a look at what are the options for Illinois to get out of this cycle. So we went through a decision grid, started with today. We have forecasted capacity shortages. There's basically 3 things you could do. You could increase your imports by improving your existing transmission or bringing a new transmission. Those are the 2 solutions that are actually take longer than building new capacity. So they're really not viable. You could delay the retirements of natural gas and coal power plants, which very well might happen. The Elgin peaker plant in Elgin was going to retire this year, but with the higher capacity prices, they're going to continue operations. So maybe that happens. You could deploy new capacity. We already talked about the challenges of deploying new renewables. Just a long lead time, right? And a really poor batting average. Or maybe you could take in some battery storage. There's a modest lead time there, but you have some scalability and advantages on the emission side that are relevant here. So we chose to look at battery storage as the basis of the study. The study wasn't purely theoretical. It was informed by the market impacts of deploying large-scale batteries in other markets. Here's an example of a story that came out in May that we were aware of. And Texas, for all of its challenges, did work to deploy a significant amount of battery storage after the most recent blackout. In the last winter, in January, over 2 days, according to the study by Aurora, those batteries provided a cost suppression effect in the amount of about $680 million for Texas or ERCOT consumers. 2 days, $600 million, it's pretty material. So that gave us further support to continue to move forward with the study. And how did we structure the study? Well, the study started really with the policy study that the IPA put out this spring. And the IPA study results are outlined here, where they identified that the cost of 8,500 megawatts of battery storage in the state would cost, you see the top line number there, of $6.4 billion. Then they identified that there would be wholesale energy price suppression of $0.5 billion over the 20-year period. They did not put in a value for capacity price suppression. They did not identify whether and to what extent wholesale transmission cost would be avoided. They did identify that utility distribution system capital cost avoidance would be about $25 million. And so from the IPA's assessment, the direct consumer cost impact of 8,500 megawatts of battery storage in Illinois would have a net cost to consumers of just under $6 billion over that 20-year period. IPA also identified certain macroeconomic benefits, the value of reliability, value of reduced emissions, value of increased economic activity. So we started with that, and we said, let's try to fill in the blanks, especially on this capacity price issue. So we went through and we used a more current load projections for MISO and PJM that were used in the IPA study. And we really tried to then build out some scenarios to identify whether the 8,500 megawatt number was even the correct number. So we took parts of the IPA study, said, let's fill in some holes here. Let's also take a look at the scale of the capacity shortage or the capacity hole that needs to be filled in Illinois. So the outputs that we were able to identify were the incremental capacity needs that could be met with battery storage, and then a new net consumer cost impact when we roll in the full costs against the full price suppression benefits in wholesale energy prices, as well as wholesale capacity prices. And I'm not going to read this busy table to you. I just direct your attention all the way to the right. We ran a series of scenarios. In this set of scenarios, we used a business as usual that assumed announced retirements or planned retirements and a normal load increase. And then we started to tweak it in the scenarios where we accelerated a few of the fuel plant retirements. That's scenario B. And then in scenario C, we delayed renewable energy resource deployments to reflect some of the challenges in the market. We broke it out for Ameren and ComEd, and then down at the bottom is the statewide total. And we identified that starting in 2030, if you go down to the bottom under the total section on a statewide basis, you could have 2,000 to 2,500 megawatt shortage in the state, right? If you carry that all the way over to 2039, you see that those shortages continue to build to somewhere around 9,500 to, in this case, 11,900 megawatts of capacity deficit. We ran some other scenarios that identified, again, business as usual, scenario A, and then we just projected that there would be absolute decreases, not just delays, but absolute decreases in renewable deployments, and then increased demand for electricity above the current rate. Ran the same scenarios. Again, if you drop down to the bottom and go all the way over to the right, you see that under those assumptions, that the capacity deficit in Illinois could be somewhere in the 9,300 range, all the way up to 15,600 range on a statewide basis. So what this did, it validated that the 8,500 megawatt number is actually pretty conservative. 8,500 megawatt number that was in the original legislation was actually pretty conservative, and that the whole, in a worst case scenario, what we have here, could be as much as 15,000 megawatts. So it's a big deficit, especially when you have a wholesale market entities that don't seem to have a solution ready, set, go to backfill that. So we ran our numbers and we said, all right, well, if you were to bring on, in this case, 8,500 megawatts of capacity in Illinois, according to how the legislation reads, what would the wholesale price suppression effect be? Well, our numbers are that would benefit consumers by suppressing capacity prices in the capacity auctions over the 20-year period by about $8.6 billion, right? Remember, the Texas market had $680 million of benefit in 2 days, right? We're saying 8.6 billion over 20 years. So again, trying to be as conservative as possible. I was not able to figure out how to do a transmission cost avoidance, so that's still undefined. But what this added analysis does is that it swings the 8,500 megawatt capacity program from a net deficit, net consumer cost of 5.9 billion into a net positive of about $3 billion over the 20-year period. And when you net out on-bill charges to support the incentive for battery storage against the price suppression effect that we are projecting, you get a pattern of cost for consumers, of net costs, that shows that in the first few years, yes, there will be some net cost to consumers that they'll see on their bill. As you see here, for ComEd customers, that would start out in 2030, somewhere around 50 cents a month for a typical residential customer. For Ameren customers, about 75 cents a month. So pretty tame. They rise a little bit, but then they start to fall off as the full effect of 8,500 megawatts of capacity is realized into the market. And over time, over the 19-year period, the Ameren customer saves, on average, about $5 a month. The ComEd customer saves about $3 a month. So that's it. A lot of math, I know, pretty boring, I get it, but that's the premise and the story of where the study came from and where we ended up. Happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. I was getting texts, messages while you were speaking, just saying what great information this is, and people really appreciate having that level of detail. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, Andrew. I think everybody's either. Oh, there's a new message. Hold on a second. Well, I guess I'll just read this when I'm talking. Kevin asked, why don't residential customers see increased bills until after 2030 if deployment starts sooner?
I can take that, Mark, if you want, or you can take it. I think that's when sort of we expect that with the cadence of the contracts. Again, the study was, I think the study was intended to sort of look at when a likely first date was, not what's the worst case scenario or best case scenario in terms of in terms of deployment.
And it was
Okay,
also
great.
Anticipated that 2030 would be when these systems would start going online.
Exactly.
Right. And it's actually been something of interest to the policymakers because they understand now that the cost impact doesn't show up for quite a few years from now. And I think that gives them some comfort.
And Leslie, that's actually a great transition into the legislation. So happy to talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect transition. Why don't you take the reins, Michael?
Sounds good. All right. I am Michael Strong. I'm a partner at the law firm of Fox Swibel Levin Carroll, which if you repeat 3 times fast into the mirror, you'll get a PJM Tier 1 SREC deposited into your account. So there's a lot in the bill. It's several hundred pages, although like only 30% of the length of CJA, so this is relatively slim, by comparison. It covers a lot of ground. I think the overarching theme and why Mark went first is we have a need, and this bill is addressing, well, how do we get there, and how do we learn some of the lessons and adjust based on some of the lessons of what's happened in the regulatory sector, recently. So a big part of the centerpiece is, of course, utility scale storage. As everyone on this call knows, the IPA kind of procures in 2 different ways. And then there's sort of separate concepts with the Commerce Commission. The IPA tends to do 2 things, either competitive procurements that are pay as bid on a standard contract, or programs where they have some mechanism, whether first come, first serve, or something else, to pick to pick applicants for a standard price, or at least a knowable price. And then, of course, we have things like the DG rebates that aren't IPA programs or procurements, but they're utility tariffs that are kind of come one, come all, anyone who qualifies. Net metering is very similar as well. So when we look at what we did with storage, the top line, easy to quote, is 8.5 gigawatts of utility scale storage through competitive procurements. And who knows, I think based on, where Mark's study came out and, the PJM auction results that Mark mentioned, there sounds like there's a really good lobbying case for a higher number, which benefits everyone. So we'll have that. It's not utility scale only. I see a number of companies, some familiar faces who are interested on the distributed side, and there are really two areas of interest, and both are tariffed programs. So again, a kind of a come one, come all, rather than a limited capacity program like the adjustable block program. We're looking at something more like the DG rebates, at least in the sense of being always open and without limit. One is a standalone storage tariff. The legislation sets out sort of a way to value, and then create a payment to the standalone storage, both behind the meter and front of meter. This is for distributed standalone storage, largely modeled on the New York experience, translated somewhat to Illinois. In addition, and this will be review for those who have been following the multi-year grid plans, we had the privilege of being able to advance similar proposals in both the regulatory litigation and in legislation. So if you have been following multi-year grid plans and seen the VPP and CS+S proposals, it's the same thing here in statute, called something slightly different, but new programs that essentially provide value for distributed solar or other renewable inverter-based renewables co-located with storage, and then having that storage deploy or deployable at least, during those hours, whether known in advance or based on events with 24 hours notice, when the grid needs it. So that is at a high level, the storage program. I'm going to kind of click through some of this quickly. Happy to answer questions, but I know I'm running a little behind and it's my job to play catch up. Also, again, with lessons learned, one of the reasons why we've had some issues, and in parallel with the slide Mark showed about very little of the PJM and MISO capacity going forward, is we've had an unfortunate number of utility scale systems that have gone through and won the IPA's utility scale procurements, simply dropping out and not reaching PTO. I think there are kind of two factors driving that. One being some of the lingering uncertainty around, well, if there's a budget shortfall in the RPS, what happens to our revenue. And number two, those are standard pay as bid contracts that are non-negotiable, not just in price, but in term after you've accepted it. So what happens if you run into a particular issue that needs an amendment or change order? So the legislation seeks to fix both of those, putting a plan in place for what it looks like if there's a shortfall. And the short answer is hit the brakes, or at least tap the brakes on new procurements, while making sure that, without regard to the rate cap, current contracts are paid, and also providing for utility scale contracts a renegotiation ability. The third sort of lesson learned area, although at the state of Illinois level, we largely cannot fix PJM and MISO capacity, at least by, interconnection, at least by state law. We can certainly fix Illinois jurisdictional, and I think we've seen that as interest in distributed renewables and small utility scale renewables has increased. So have the challenges with interconnection. So we tried to keep our ears open to some of the particular and general challenges that the industry has faced and try to address those in statute, some of which may come across as oddly specific, and some of which are a little more generally applicable in nature. Finally, we have a couple of changes of what I'll call institutional change. One is to create an equivalent of the Office and Retail Market Development, which handles retail supply, to also cover renewables, to allow there to be an entity within the commission that's charged with being our industry's advocate, to gather information and take that high-level view that currently it's very challenging for the commission to take. And also in there is an obligation for utilities to have adequate resources, both human and technical, to handle the volume of interconnection requests that they're getting. Because if we have sort of slowdowns or errors or mishaps, it can have a pretty substantial cascading effect. So that is, in a nutshell, what's in legislation.